Okay, I think we're live. Welcome to Your Bytes, Your Rights, a live weekly discussion and podcast about data ownership, digital rights, and your privacy. I'm Jeff Jokish, founder of Privacy Plan and a vocal data privacy researcher. I'm here with my co-host, Christian Kamir, managing partner of Sustany Capital, a VC fund that focuses on blockchain tech. Christian has a big interest in privacy, identity, the future of money. He's done stellar work on understanding problems of central bank digital currencies. Chris, I had a chilling thought last night. Have you ever read Privacy is Power by Carissa Veliz?
I have to say I haven't heard of it.
Well, she starts the book off with a chapter called Data Vultures, which I think you would like.
That sounds good.
Yeah, right? And she walks through the day in the life of a normal person and outlines the myriad numbers of ways in our lives where we're leaking personal data and all the different organizations that are sort of scooping it up. And it's actually a really scary chapter. But it occurred to me as I thought about children's privacy that all of this stuff that happens to adults and has happened to adults in the past is now starting to happen to children, right? Children are learning online, they're living online, they're growing up on social media, and almost all of this, maybe not everything, but a lot of the stuff that she talks about in that book now applies to children. And I don't think we're protecting them enough. We have some laws in place, but those laws were written 15, 20, 10 years ago. I mean, even GDPR, one of the newer laws, I don't think it really contemplates all the stuff that kids are being subjected to with social media and online learning based upon how completely our lives changed in the post-COVID era. So, with that in mind, go ahead and say hello, Chris. I give you that opportunity.
Well, yeah, I managed to mess up the video feed again. So whenever I talk, you're gonna see a black screen because OBS captured my camera and won't release it. So I have to figure that out. So whenever I talk, you're gonna see a black screen until I figure this out.
Well, do that. I'm gonna check our participants here.
We got Jodie and Vikram and Mohammed.
Yeah, we should have some more people here. We do have a guest that we're supposed to be bringing on, Jeff Kluge, FHCA, and he is not with us yet. So hopefully he joins in here shortly. I'm waiting for him to reply and have not seen his response yet. So as of yesterday, he was all on board. So I'm not sure what's going on. We might have to pull somebody from the attendance, maybe Jodie, I don't know, Mohammed, Vikram on board to talk if we don't get Jeff here shortly. But I've got a few more things to say here. So I wanted to actually, the topic today is obviously children's privacy and really negotiating the price of children's privacy. The regulation of children's data has been ramping up, despite the fact that it may not be adequate yet. And just to sort of give you sort of a taste of what's going on, here are a few headlines that I just pulled from the past couple of weeks. Expand online protections for 17-year-olds in the draft of the new U.S. federal privacy law was urged by committee. And in fact, in the current Three Corners bill, children as old as 17 are currently protected in that draft, which is pretty interesting. So that's something that we might want to chat about. There's also on the table right now, though it's been sort of sitting there for a while, a GDPR fine against Instagram for children's privacy violations that may be somewhere in the range of about $1 billion. That's from the Irish Data Protection Association, DPA. And it's sort of stuck there because the other DPAs don't agree for whatever reason. That's not quite obvious. Maybe we could discuss that. There's also a study out that shows that remote learning apps are sending data, kids' data, and also behavioral information to advertisers. Probably this study by Human Rights Watch may be part of the reason that the FTC is now looking to crack down on ed tech. And they've released a bunch of new guidance, including information that says that they're going to prohibit mandatory collection of data, essentially some data minimization guidelines, and essentially saying that COPPA covered companies must not condition a child's participation on the disclosure of more information than is reasonably necessary to participate. For example, an ed tech business that doesn't need to email students can't require kids to give them email addresses, which seems pretty damn smart to me. So, and there's several more prohibitions that they're requiring as well. So at this point, I would have introduced Jeff and gotten him to give us some information. Let me check and see what his status might be here. But then it looks like we've got Vikram wants to join us on stage.
Yeah, I moved him up.
Okay, and looks like Jeff Kluge is also working on getting in, but
I am on.
There he is.
I am on the call. I just am not on the stage, so I apologize.
Oh,
there he is. Good.
Oh, let me. Oh, can I fix that? Is that my fault?
He
Make
asked if you would send him an invite to a different email
I just
address.
made him co-host. That should fix it, hopefully.
All right. Let me also send you this.
Then I just have to fix myself here.
You can send him a different invite to a different email address. That might help, Chris. Get him get some live video here.
Oh,
Chris, I will send that over to you.
okay.
That'll help. In the meantime, let me go ahead and introduce Jeff. And pull my notes back up here. Sorry. 1 second. And so we've got Jeff. Is your last name Kluge? Is that pronounced correctly?
Kluge.
Okay, sorry, Jeff Gloopy.
That's right.
It's
So Jeff
it's
has,
smartish in German. But
Kluge.
you know that, right?
I don't.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Jeff Kluge has had a successful 25-year investment and finance career, a lifelong passion in technology, and an obsession for ethics. He founded Holistic Ethics, an advisory and consulting company to transform how today's leaders think about and put into action strategies that will not only sustainably grow the business, but comply with the global data protection laws, and also enhance the well-being of their stakeholders. Our interest in having Jeff on the panel today is the intersection of AI ethics and children's data and privacy protections. But he also plays a big role in For Humanity, an organization that we love, and he helped draft the certification scheme for auditors that is used to provide transparency and accountability for AI, algorithmic, and autonomous systems, specifically regarding the GDPR Children's Code. So his work is also highly aligned with California Age-Appropriate Design Code, and he's drafting the Auditor's Manual for age assurance, an important aspect to ensure the delineations of age are respected for those who build systems that interact with kids. So welcome, Jeff.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Still trying to get on stage, so we'll try to do
Click the link that I'd send back to you on LinkedIn, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
That will then close your existing one and should let you in a new.
Okay.
If you wanna try to get on stage there, we can pass the baton over to Vikram and let him talk for a moment.
I think I may have just gotten here.
Well, awesome. There we go. That looks good.
Yeah, very good.
Awesome.
Hello there.
Now I just wish I could
Wonderful.
fix myself.
Sorry for the technology problems, folks.
What he is saying is sorry for Chris being dumb. Translation.
That's quite all right. So, Jeff, thank you. Chris, thank you very much. Did I just get muted?
Nope, you're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Here we go. This should work now, right?
Yeah, you're coming in twice, I think.
There you go.
This will now work.
Yep, very good.
Great. Knew we'd get there eventually. So my interest around the children's code came about when I saw what For Humanity was doing around AI ethics. And a central part of my work is looking at how being ethical or acting in an ethical way, living to the standards, the rules that we have for ourselves, enhances and improves our well-being or happiness. We are happier when we are honest and more ethical. And in looking at the work from For Humanity and seeing around AI ethics and what GDPR had put in place, that a priority of a company is the well-being of the child, now on par with that of shareholders, struck me as just amazing. And that really got the interest to continue and pick up and be a part of that. And Ryan Carrier had done just a great job of engaging and bringing in all these varied opinions, and raised my hand and got involved in that to help draft what will be the certification scheme auditors will use when they are looking through those AI systems. So it's very exciting. I hope there's more enforcement related issues that come along. I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit, but I'll leave that as part of the intro and move on to the next panelist.
Sure. Well, Jeff, we talk a lot about, companies just collecting children's data, and that can be a problem. But really where the bigger issues can happen is when companies start processing that data and using it in algorithms, which is exactly what you're talking about. So just grabbing the data, that can be problematic, right? But having the data is not nearly as problematic as processing it in ways that might violate the rights of those children or do something that might cause them harm. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, collecting the data itself isn't bad. There is a problem, a big risk that companies take on, though, in terms of security data breaches, right? Someone hacking or accessing that data in an illegal form that now just has put all of that sensitive data in harm's way.
Right. Well, collecting it's technically illegal depending upon what law you're violating, right? But it's not necessarily intrinsically bad as opposed to processing it, right?
And what I find amazing is that predominantly society has been asking, or developers, engineers, corporations have been asking the question of how do we make money off of this data? I can't help but think of a very prominent chief operating officer of a social media company that came over to monetize the data that they were building of their users. And we were asking the question, how do we make money off of it? Where if we looked at another question of how can we really help this person through their daily life in a positive way, we could have an entirely different outcome. And children's data is much like that. There's a tremendous amount of good that can happen of processing data to help children through their daily life with self-esteem, with interactions, good, informative, evidence-based programs that can be brought about. But not many companies are doing that yet. And that's what is somewhat of a touchstone for me in terms of, okay, why aren't we having people just look at it another way?
Yeah, in our thread on LinkedIn, Marianne Terveen was speaking about data sharing of children's data and doing that in an appropriate way and talking about how valuable that could actually be. Well, I really sort of second that. The opportunities here are just as amazing as the downsides. So we need to keep that in mind, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Let's we've got Vikram on stage here. Let's get some thoughts from him and have him introduce himself, since I don't have a bio available. Vikram, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. I'm the CEO of a company, onlysecurity, founder and CEO. we focus on online privacy and security, specifically as it relates to the connected home. So we look at it holistically, not just device by device, because I think the problem of online privacy and security has gone well beyond the browser in this day and age. Our product essentially allows people to block not just security threats, but also privacy threats across apps, websites, smart speakers, televisions, etc. And this conversation is of great interest to me because we've been looking a lot at what specifically around not just data collection, right? But it's also around understanding how to protect the information. So we're finding a lot of disconnect in a lot of different areas. One is, if you look at COPPA, it says children, the definition of children is under the age of 13 and under, right? So why not 18 and under, right? So there's one discrepancy. The second is around what is getting collected. And what we are increasingly coming to the conclusion of is that there is no such thing as de-anonymized data. You can pretty much correlate across multiple different data sets or other sources once you get some pieces of information. And the third is it's also about I think there needs to be a lot of light that needs to be shined around who's collecting it. So for example, if you have a gaming app, is it just a game developer collecting it, or but we also need to shine a light on who else that game developer is sharing it with. And I think we need to have more transparency in laws around, okay, if you're collecting A, B, and C pieces of information about a specific player of a specific game, and you're now sharing information with 124 different entities, what are you sharing with who, right? And that transparency needs to be there in some law or the other. So from what I can see from all the laws, first of all, there is no restrictions around de-anonymized data. And second is there is no granularity requirement around what's being shared. So how do we all, folks like us, put our heads together and bring this into the national conversation is really what I'm interested in.
Yeah, you bring up a heck of a lot of points there, Vikram, about, de-identified data, anonymous data, what the definition is of children's data, both in terms of the type of data and what's the definition of a child. And then, I don't think you explicitly talked about it, but then what is the organization's responsibility for figuring out if the data subject actually is a child, which is, maybe one of the problems that we have with at least US laws that define children. Like COPPA, right? I mean, COPPA is very strong law for people that know that they have collected the information of a child, but it doesn't actually require you to figure out whether that data subject is a child. So that's a pretty big loophole.
Yeah, and therein lies my point, right? Which is that even if you do want to comply with a lot of this and you do want to do the right thing, either algorithmically or otherwise, right? Where is the guidance on what is the right? And the compliance bar is so low that if people just meet compliance, it's not going to really solve the problem.
Yeah. I don't know if everybody saw, but there was actually a pretty big headline yesterday that Instagram is implementing a technology called Yodie, which does age estimation in a privacy-preserving way. And essentially what it does is facial recognition, though I hate to actually use that term, but it scans your face, doesn't actually recognize you, doesn't create a face template, but uses some magic to figure out how old you are based upon your face, and is apparently really good technology. I've looked at it, and a bunch of other privacy professionals have looked at it, and it's pretty damn good. Apparently good enough that Instagram now says they're going to use it. So
it's giving you a range?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And for older kids, teens, it's incredibly good. When you get down to 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I think it's, maybe like an age range of 2 or 3 years. So it's not quite as good at that youngest age brackets, right? But once you get past that, it's very, very good. It knows within a year or two.
I think in what I might have sent you a little bit earlier, Jeff, I'm working on the manual for age assurance within For Humanity. And in doing that, there's another competitor that has AI-based facial recognition that is claiming to get down to around a year. And that's really good. That's a good start for us. But if you begin to look at the age groups, 5 to 6, around 13, 16, 18 years old, 1 year makes an incredible difference.
Yes.
So you may estimate someone to be 17 or 17 and a half when they're maybe over of adult, or someone could be 18 and a half and you're estimating them to be under.
Right.
So that 1 year still makes an incredible difference at 13. The manual as it's posted right now, while it does acknowledge these types of platforms, it's not good enough. If you're not processing significant data, then it could be acceptable. That could be a risk that the risk committee accepts. But for the most part, the position today is that it's not there yet. And there's a bit of a trust issue, I think, that Instagram will need to overcome based upon the testimony in Congress of Frances Haugen that, sure, okay, you're saying that this happens, but we know where your interests really are positioned. You just don't have enough credibility to start saying that you've solved it yet.
Yeah,
because you're not transparent.
Yeah. And she asked for the right thing, right? So surprisingly, she didn't actually ask to have Facebook and its subsidiary regulated. She asked, well, just make the data available to everybody to actually surface these externalities, which are horrendous in my personal opinion. So we have been discussing this on the show for some time and even for longer on different platforms for like a decade at this point in time, because what these companies are selling is not advertising, right? That's an important thing to realize, because they don't care about the end result. So they will sell whatever social engineering as a service solution to whatever is the highest bidder, to whatever end. And that's really the problem, right? So there needs to be transparency towards that end. And there's some interesting topic here, and that's probably someone that we're going to have on the show in the pretty near future here. One of my friends actually in AI established facial recognition to the extent to know how people are feeling, and can mimic those and express those as certain content making people feel good or bad or interested or otherwise. So that's almost more interesting to the extent that you can bring interesting content to younger people and engage them. You also want to know that, right? So that's even more important in my mind, because my default position is always the same. By default, we have the unalienable right not to be observed regardless of any age.
Yeah, and of course, with children, you've got the problem that they're research says that they're more susceptible to advertising and social engineering, right?
Yeah, that seems self-explaining. Like, we don't teach critical thinking, and we definitely don't teach it to the younger folks, and most people are not in a position to actually educate their children in this way, because they've not gone through an educational system, they've gone through an indoctrination system. That's another big part of the problem. So, but ultimately it comes down to how we're doing information distribution on the web, right? So what content is being distributed and gets preference.
And another complicating factor to that is that children, as science and development has shown us, oftentimes don't understand the difference between commercials and reality. Mm-hmm. They see the cartoon characters jumping off a roof and they think that they can do that. They don't have the frontal cortex capability of that executive function yet. And much of that doesn't mature until in the late 20s. So to have that kind of advertising and those messages that come about, as you mentioned, Chris, from the highest bidder is what I want this person, I want this profile, and I'm going to put my material in front of them. Again, not knowing whether it is real, whether it's fictitious, is very problematic. And I would, again, argue that most of that is done without the intent of providing well-being to that person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just trying to sell them something or to make a position.
I had a really interesting experience that you guys might find enlightening. I worked for a startup quite a few years ago now, but it was a search engine, a text-based search engine where people could type a question, a text-based search engine. You send us a question, we would send you an answer. And for a while it was sort of human moderated, so a human would find you an answer and send it back, but then we sort of automated a lot of that. But we actually answered like 4 billion questions. So this was sort of a big time platform called Cha-Cha. But sort of toward the end of the life of that, I think it was around 2000, I don't know, terrible with dates, maybe 2015. Maybe it's a little bit later than that. Anyway, we also launched a social media platform, and this was tailored more toward teens. And I got to do the content moderation for that. And this was a social media platform that was based around questions. So the idea was you would ask a question and then your peers could answer that question for you. But of course, it turned out to be more of social media, right? More than the Q&A. And I got to moderate a lot of that, which was heavenly, as you can imagine. But I actually got to see a lot of this same stuff that we're talking about now, maybe not quite as bad as it was then, but the critical thinking skills of a lot of these kids was just not there yet. And one of the things that we did, which may not have been the brightest idea, was took me and some of my team members and actually pretended to be members of that, those young people, right? And tried to guide conversations in certain ways that were more thought-provoking rather than disagreeable, right? So we were actually trying to guide better behavior with our content moderation team instead of just deleting shit or banning people. And it actually worked, right? But it was complicated and hard and maybe not the right thing that we should have been doing, but we did it. And it was to some extent fun and worked. It worked. But I got to see a lot of these thought processes of how these kids were thinking and how they were thinking incorrectly and how even at that point social media was impacting them in negative ways. So it was eye-opening for me.
Yeah, to dovetail on that, Jeff, Tim from the audience was asking if I can explain social engineering as a service a little bit more versus advertising. So the average platform now has more than, what is it, Jeff, 20,000 data points on you, and it's pretty up to date. So they have an asymmetric information advantage over you, meaning they know more about you than you think you know about yourself, right? So they know where you are, what you did yesterday, and what you did maybe an hour ago. And so in hacking, the most common form of hacking is really social engineering, as in I convince someone that I am something or of authority or otherwise have special knowledge or need to have you do something based on what I know about you, i.e. I call you from AT&T, I call you from a government agency, and then I'll make you do something. And the point here being is that this is the type of information that these social media platforms, quote unquote, make available to whoever wants to buy it from them, and then convince you to do something. And they don't really care, obviously, whether or not that something is buying something, doing something, or not doing something, i.e. not voting. So they just care that someone pays them for that eyeball and for that outcome if it's a pay-per-click, pay-per-action type of theme. So in my opinion, I've been saying this for more than a decade now, what Google and Facebook and most of the other platforms are selling has not been advertising for quite some time, right? Because it's not based on you looking at something, it's based on you doing something. And to get you to do something, I need to first understand what you're actually gravitating to, and then move you down a funnel. Meaning, as soon as you put one letter, and you can do this exercise, actually very interesting. As soon as you put one letter, just go to google.com, put in one letter, and see what the first result is. So that result is top of funnel. So you're top of funnel for whatever. When I put the letter D right now into Google, I get Domino's. I haven't bought anything from Domino's ever. I don't order pizza, I don't eat pizza, but that's the result I'm getting. And then from there, it's making other suggestion based on whatever outcome furthers ultimately the increase of shareholder value of that operator, of that platform, in this case Google, or more precisely Alphabet Inc. I'm gonna leave it there. I write about that topic quite a bit.
If I can just interject there real quick to offer another viewpoint on that, which is, whenever I get on a plane and I strike up a conversation with the person next to me and they find out that I work in cybersecurity for the last decade, the most common question I get asked is my phone listening to me? And the response I give is, maybe, maybe not, and maybe it depends on the app. That's the apps that are there. But here's the point. They don't need to. There's enough information about you that they don't need to. And that really gets people's eyes widen quite a bit. And that speaks to the point that you just talked about, Chris, which is there's so much information about you, and the data of inference and signs of inference from that data can lead to enough that nobody needs to actually constantly monitor at all in direct ways.
And I think there is one of the other big complications, that data inference. So they're looking at that data and then inferring some type of pattern of behavior, future behavior, when that could be furthest from the truth. There was a great post about a year ago. It was call it an interrogation of a system, if you will. It was done to a human, of a woman. And it was looking at all of her behavior and trying to map out, okay, why were you stalking this person? Why were you doing this? What was your motive? And you could see that they had a bias and some interest of where they wanted to go. And as the story developed, and at the end of it, it was entirely wrong of why that was inferred. And I think there's the real danger of a lot of this data inference, is that people haven't taken the time to look at that data a bit further and say, what is in the best interest of this person? We know enough about them. We know what their values are, if we think we do. Where are they trying to go? Are they trying to lose weight? And here we are pushing food products that are unhealthy or bad choices in front of them. That's where that ethical choice, one of our audience members was talking about the ethical related issues of what these systems are doing, and they're all behind a black box. And up until this point, nobody wants to show how they are processing that data. And this is where the independent audit of those systems comes in. Again, Jeff, to you, as your point of For Humanity is a not-for-profit beacon unto itself of, we want to get the auditing of these systems to be transparent and hold somebody accountable for them. I think it's admirable work, and being able to just start asking better questions needs more people at the table to help get there.
I like to think about and tell people to remember that sort of the way I think about the taxonomy of personal data. There's so many different personal data points that we can talk about, right? And laws generally regulate only parts of those, whether that's the data of adults or children. So there's the data that we specifically give to a platform, right? When we fill out a form or take a test or enter stuff into social media, sign up for a contest, sign up for a scholarship, those types of things. But then there's the data that they observe about us, right? That's a different bucket, right? Mm-hmm. Observed data. which is a huge bucket, of course, right? And then there's the bucket that you just talked about, Jeff, which is inferred data, which is another just huge amount of information. And then there's data that they might buy about us from a data broker, right? Which is a whole different bucket with different legal properties potentially, right? And then there's data that they might actually create about us from an AI model or something else, right? So, and there's probably other buckets too, but those are maybe the 4 or 5 most easily recognizable. So when we talk about personal data, it's not just the data that we give overtly to a company. It's generally a lot more. And often privacy laws only address that narrow band of things that we specifically give to a company. Often the data rights only address that small, sector of data, when all this other information might be a free-for-all. Now, it depends upon the privacy law, whether that's, all fair game or not, but it's an important distinction.
Yeah, so there is some, I'll post on the chat. Nature magazine, actually 2019, they posted some research. Basically, the finding is that all it takes to identify 99.98% of Americans, individuals specifically, is 15 pieces of data, demographic data. So I guess there's 2 things there, right? Well, one is there's way more than that that's being collected. Second is, I think we also need to be clear about, I think people need to be more aware of what constitutes demographic data and what they are revealing. So it's not just what you give away, it's also what else can be gleaned about your behavior, and that too constitutes demographic data. So for example, if you're in a sparsely populated area and you're a male 25 to 34 and you go out to buy milk, right, right? You can be pretty much pinpointed with just male 25 to 34 buying milk. Sounds innocuous, but they know it's you, right? So just understanding the impact of what can be gleaned based on on piece of information about you that may be innocuous is very important.
Absolutely. Hey, I noticed a question from the audience that we didn't address, I don't think, about what's the difference between social engineering and advertising from Tim. Chris, do you want to address that real quick?
I did while you were taking a nap, actually.
Or I can, I guess.
I actually did explain that while you were taking a nap earlier.
Oh, never mind. Sorry. My bad. Okay. All right, back on track then. Hey, do we have anybody else from the audience that wants to join the panel and give us your take on these subjects, or ask a question of the panel? We've got plenty of other stuff to talk about. We've got. I wondered if anybody had a thought on the kerbo ruling. I imagine Jeff might. This was a ruling against Weightwatchers by the FTC recently, where they collected a bunch of children's information illegally, and the FTC not only fined them, but essentially said because their AI model was built on illegal data, that they needed to disgorge themselves of that entire machine learning model. This is a new enforcement mechanism that could be pretty valuable to keep organizations from doing such a thing in the future. So I think it's pretty amazing. Obviously, a lot of companies aren't all excited about that because it becomes a little bit problematic. I mean, if you think about it, right, if you have a right to delete your data and you sort of push that concept to the extreme, if my data is embedded in a machine learning model and I decide I want to exercise my right to delete my data, does a company have to then go and pull my data individually out of that model? I mean, that would be crazy for them to try to have to then, redo their entire model without my individual data in there, right? Or is it?
I think it's brilliant. We need to see the stepping up of the government-related agencies around the world with these fines and standing up for people. And it almost feels a little bit like they're too slow, that they're not reacting in that regard. But if you have collected data illegally or improperly, yes, you should disgorge all of that data. There's the question that comes up of, well, these models are so sophisticated, we don't know where your data is in the model. It's like, well, then should you really be creating a model that is so complicated that you don't know how it works? So yes, that my data, if I were part of that, I write to the company, I want everything removed, then my data should be removed. And as Vikram pointed out, all you need are 15 data points, and you know that I'm there, or you know that I'm in your model. It should be removed. And
Well,
again, that goes back to the transparency that we were talking about before, that these models, they're predominantly, no disrespect to the engineers, right? I'm not in this space, but they've been designed and built by people with predominantly one interest or view, and they just haven't been asking the question of, well, what's the other side of this data? How can I be more empathetic about how this model is reacting? It doesn't have enough opinion in there yet to really make them far more valuable. They've just been kind of a monetary process.
I guess there's some good thoughts there, and I agree with that in principle. There are problems with data science today, not only in that transparency, but also in explainability of the models. I've had some pushback from some data science people, data scientists that I've spoken with, but I've seen some DARPA research that essentially points out the fact that in general, right, and this is not all cases, but in general, machine learning models that are more advanced and generally more accurate have lower explainability. So if you want higher accuracy in your models, you're probably sacrificing explainability of how the hell that model actually works. You're making a larger black box, and all other things equal, if you're rushing to market with the most advanced and most accurate model, you're sacrificing explainability, right? And probably transparency by default as well. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that you can't fix those things necessarily, but it's harder to do so. Which it becomes a problem, right? Then if you're trying to back out data, it's a problem. If you're trying to make it a model that people can understand how you actually arrived at that decision, it's harder. Yeah. If you're trying to actually explain to regulators how this model actually works, it's harder.
Yeah, totally. So it very much also depends on the type of learning models you're using, right? And even within like things like natural language programming, you can structure it within neural networks. You can structure it so that you have multiple clusters of those and pre-filter that. But that would actually be an interesting approach to trying to solve the problem. What I mean by that specifically is, so if you're of a certain age, your language is obviously somewhat different as to where once you grow up and your vocabulary increases and you start specializing on certain things, your search terms will change. And we also seen this throughout the internet history itself. Initially, you guys probably remember that everybody had like the typical search terms embedded in their HTML. They were 3-letter words, if you know what I mean. And then ultimately today we have search terms that expand to being as many as 7 or 8. But I would assume that this is something that can be learned, as in can be learned by the site that's employing otherwise algorithms to see this is how this particular individual arrived here, because that's data that you're usually getting through your analytics anyway. So that might actually be hinting towards a solution to that problem, if that makes any sense. But at some point in time, if we want to geek out on that, I have access to a lot of people that work in that particular space of natural language processing and neural networks.
Yeah, I think the NLP and neural networks are easier to understand, easier to figure out explainability on. When you start going, to deep learning and things like that, it's harder to understand. But of course, there are crossbreeds between all of that stuff, and generally, it's not just one thing. So it's hard to say. Okay, maybe to a different subject. Are there solutions to this other than auditing results? Are there ways that we should be changing our laws to better protect children, to better hold companies accountable? Are we going in the right direction? Or are we going in the wrong direction?
From what I can see, we're going in a. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
From what I can see, we're going in a confused direction, right? We're getting different laws in different states, different sets of standards, etc. So, I mean, even if you, like I said, even if you wanted to adhere to it, it's so hard to interpret and comprehend. I think we need to move towards almost like a rating system, like how you have for movies in terms of what's appropriate for various ages, from a privacy perspective for children as well. What's the privacy risk? So if you reveal A and B, here's what can be inferred, and hence the risk kind of, and that results in a rating kind of system. Unless we get to that, we are really no closer to any kind of a solution. It's my thought. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic.
Yeah, I think government is by its nature very slow moving, and it's very reactionary. You look at the hearings that we've had maybe this year, I haven't seen anything significant come about yet, right? The Congress in the US is distracted with other things. So it really is incumbent on the other stakeholders that are involved in this process. Right now, I think we are seeing a massive acceleration in the awareness the consumer has over their data. Who has it? What are they trying to do with it? And do we want them to do that or not? And I think those kinds of movements, Chris, I saw a comment that you made once before about data brokers. Personally, I've started connecting with those data brokers and removing myself from their systems. Just emailing the data processing officer and getting removed. And some of them are a few steps to do, but there's one way that we can then gain some control. The other is just being more aware about the apps that we're engaging. Do I trust them or not? And I've written on this that we are at the beginning as the stock markets have been correcting and reaching a bear market. I believe what is going to lead the new market, equity-related performance, is a trend of trust. Those companies that are transparent, that allow themselves to be held accountable, that are telling people what they're doing and not washing it, but just, look, we're making some mistakes, we're making these positive changes. I believe people are going to gravitate to those companies that are working on protecting them as they engage in the online world. So the consumer, I think, is now gaining far more voice, and they will be better at reacting more quickly than government will.
Yeah.
Hopefully that consumer, one last point, Jeff, hopefully that consumer will then blend into the companies, and the Great Resignation will begin to see people that really are working for businesses where values are lived and acted upon, and that gets to a part of mine of ethics. So we'll have more ethical companies that are transparent and accountable. There you go.
I think that's probably true. The other thing that we're seeing happen is, platform companies like Google and Apple taking privacy maybe somewhat more seriously. But of course, then we've got to hold them to account as well. And maybe that happens. I think that it does make us all safer when they make their platform safer for us, as long as the data that they're then in turn holding about us is safe, right? And they're being a good steward of that data. But another thing that's going on is, at this point in time, the FTC is starting to do more rulemaking. They've been freed up now that, well, now that there's that they don't have a Republican majority holding up all of the rulemaking, essentially. That may not last very long, but if they can actually do some good there, that may change things a lot. That's why they're able to potentially regulate some ed tech companies now. But somebody made a comment here that the companies hide behind FERPA, and the loopholes in that law allows them to access a lot of data with not much more than a pinky promise that they won't abuse it, which is very, very true. And I don't know that the Department of Education is planning on any rulemaking anytime soon. So one of the problems we have with these large federal laws like COPPA and FERPA is that they keep states from doing any legislating in those areas. And so if the feds don't act either with congressional action or rulemaking, then there's nothing that can be done. And that keeps those businesses doing whatever it is they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, historically, what we've seen is that if you introduce new regulation, what actually happens in the real world is regulatory capture, to where the large companies that have the departments that can implement these regulations into their solutions will get to survive, whereas the smaller companies and the startups don't even get a chance to participate, right? So it's a real problem. So that's why to me, it's somewhat binary in the sense that either you build a solution that fulfills the objective of whatever platform you're engaging with better, i.e. provide an actual search engine, for example, and or you really set a sweeping rule where you determine as of January 1st, 2024, by default, you don't get to collect data, period, full stop. Yeah. And all the data that you're having, we need to reset this because it's so bad that we cannot undo those damages unless we have a brush fire. We'll put all of these data brokers out of their misery and declare that this is simply unlawful behavior, period, full stop, rather than trying to address children's data and otherwise sensitive data separately, because that is super nuanced, super difficult to actually implement, and will basically is very likely to end up being prohibitive for the introduction of new solutions. And it comes down to, I was just reading the law, the celebration around the gun laws. That is such a logical fallacy, right? Because obviously, if you want to commit crime and if you are of a certain personality, well, then you don't care about those laws to begin with, right? So then all the people that own guns and possess guns are those people that don't care about laws in the first place. It's kind of a reverse selective mechanism in that sense, right? We could see the same, to where if you want to do certain type of data brokerage, well, then you go into that jurisdiction where this is not critical. I go to China and start rolling out an app that's that snoops on everybody in the United States and doesn't care if it's a minor or not. So these are very, very hard problems that I don't think can really be solved by regulation, as much as I'm totally for it, that people think about it and start pushing out things. But from a practical level, we need to think about this more fundamentally, if that makes sense. And that's why it's really important that we create literally legal engineering classes, and it's something we're working on with a lot of different universities that get that, and then be able to classify data and data transfer for whatever reason from a legal perspective. But yeah, as you mentioned, Jeffrey, we still haven't acted on the very sensible request that what's her name, Vorhagen. I keep getting her name wrong. Yeah, Francis was making. I think that was a very sensible request. Make this data available to everybody and have researchers establish these are the actual externalities, because I think they're actually much worse. Much worse than we are seeing. It's not only wasting an hour of everybody who's engaging with this technology on a daily basis, but probably acting on the information that's being pushed in front of them. Not only children, but maybe even more so adults. I think a lot of children are actually more critical and more inquisitive than adults that have been indoctrinated into a certain paradigm at this point in time. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I think, well, I just brought Jodie Masters Gonzalez on the stage. Let's get some thoughts from her.
Hi guys, I am just quickly, we only have a few minutes left. I'm also, like Jeff, For Humanity fellow and certified auditor of independent independent auditor of AI systems, and I do situational awareness with regard to AI, algorithmic, quantum for organizations, training, change, and relates to my research as well. And so I think the topic of regulatory capture is a really critical one and an outcome of what's called regulatory deficits. And so we learned a lot during the last 50 years of the financial market regulation, and including where the deficits lie. And I think someone already mentioned, part of this regulatory capture means that certain actors in the marketplace, now we have those actors, you can call it, Silicon Valley and others now in other places, where regulatory capture, they've captured our regulatory mechanisms. And it is nothing new. Roxana mentioned that, one of these ways of weaponizing, which is what it is, because then they can use the protections meant for the public and for society to their benefit. And as Roxana mentioned, one example of this is in the ed tech, where because they're government contractors, they can hide behind or capture those protections as if they were, they're an apparatus of the government now, even though they're a private entity and not subject to the laws and other protections that were put in place. That's a deficit, 100%. And I see that we're up against the hour, but Jeff, I think this would be an amazing topic for a future discussion. There's a lot here that's going on.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Omar Tene had actually posted on Twitter when the Three Corners bill first came out, that he thought that the bill was strong enough that a lot of companies were going to rush to be covered by sectoral laws like GLBA and FERPA and COPPA and whatever else they could, so that they would not have to be covered by this new federal legislation should it pass.
Exactly.
Right? So I think you're right that there will be companies like, well, even if they're not technically ed tech now, that'll start to be claiming that they're ed tech so that they can be covered by FERPA and not something potentially more harsh.
And I would just say some of my current research that I'm in the middle of, I'm doing an investigation. It's not just ed tech. Look at your local governments, what platforms they have for data, for doing probation recommendations. Just have a look. And again, probably a topic for another discussion, but it's rampant, the capture of local government and public institutions in general.
Yeah, I think that's fruitful. We should do a session on this. All right, we are at the hour. Any last thoughts, Jeff or Vikram, before we go?
This was a great session today, Jeff and Chris. Thank you for the invitation, and just beginning to have a more open discussion with people that are working on solving these problems. Been great. Thank you.
Appreciate your attendance.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat. Being among the like-minded is awesome.
And thanks for coming on stage here late, Jodie. Your input was great as well. Chris, any last thoughts?
Yeah, only if you guys know anybody who wants to add to that topic. So Jeff and I are committed to keep working on this we work on this during the week too, obviously, but specifically every Friday. Our objective is really to bridge the gap between different disciplines, not only cybersecurity people and privacy researchers like Jeff, but also technologists that actually want to build new solutions and don't understand these topics, because that's what we see on a daily basis, right? So I look at solutions that are being pitched to us, and we looked at more than 1,500 over the past 5 years from the perspective if they actually protect what I call human agency, right? And if not, I'll put them into my list of if and when they get funding, they go into my bad list, like to what Jeff created to eventually invalidate. And I mean this very sincerely, because this is ultimately a topic that every one of us is going to be affected by long term, right? So we need to really build what I call the web for the first time, to where we preserve human agency, we don't get social engineered into doing something, and children don't get indoctrinated in whatever it is, but get to design their own future and have their parents be involved with that, rather than whatever TicToc wants these children to spend their time on, and YouTube wants to spend children their time on. And to me, this has been a topic near and dear to my heart for more than a decade at this point in time, and I'm just amazed that it has taken that long for at least a subset of the population to understand how bad it is, because it's actually much, much, much worse than people realize. I honestly think that there's people dying on a daily basis because of the way we allow these companies to distribute information and to handle quote-unquote data. And I don't even like to use this term data, because it's really much more than that. So yeah, we're gonna keep doing that, and please help us spread the word of like-minded people so they can find each other and work together. And Jeff and I will keep doing this for the next decade or two, right?
Yeah, we appreciate your attendance. This has been Your Bytes, Your Rights, episode 18, Negotiating the Price of Children's Privacy. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.